Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Ite Namani.
And I'm really a believer that Prabhupada is to be known in his books. In Vrindavan, when there was a 24-hour kirtan, when I got the 2 a.m. shift, I would notice that his light in his room was on. And he would be sitting, underneath a custom-made mosquito net, translating. So, despite all the management and dealing with the society, he put his best time into writing his books. And to this day, the Prabhupada I know is in the books. One day in Vrindavan, actually, I was walking behind him, and there was a brahmachari reading the Bhagavatam, sitting on the steps. So as Prabhupada went by, he leant over and he tapped him on the head and said, "Good boy." Because there was a controversy with the management. They didn't like us to read. They wanted us to go out and collect or work or whatever. If you read, if you wanted to be a scholar, then there was some resistance. Good boy.
One thing I always remember about Srila Prabhupada was how much he cared and how much he loved the devotees, I can remember every morning that he would come out of his room and he would come right up to me and he would say, "So how are you this morning?" Like a concerned father. And he meant it, There wasn't anything that got past Srila Prabhupada. He would come out. I remember one day we were walking around, we would circumambulate Krishna and Balaram, on the outside of the temple there, on the temple grounds, you know what I mean? In the old days, there was that iron gate in the front, and it had a chain around it with a padlock. And we were walking, chanting japa with Prabhupada. And you couldn't see that the lock was unlocked. The Prabhupada just looked at one of us and said, "Why is the lock unlocked?" And we all kind of looked at each other like, you can't tell the lock's unlocked, So one devotee ran up, and sure enough, it wasn't shut. But you could not tell from the naked eye. There was really nothing that got by him. Or he'd come out another morning and say, "Why did Chowkidar did not ring the bell at 2 o'clock in the morning?" Right? He knew. Next day, why did Chowkidar did not ring the bell at 3 o'clock? There was nothing that got by Srila Prabhupada. He knew everything, down to in Krishna's service, down to minute little things that we were oblivious to.
Another time we were on the morning walk in Vrindavan, and it was a similar thing. Prabhupada had been speaking and coming back, and then I spoke, I said, "This reminds me of a teacher I had when I was in the university, Srila Prabhupada." And Prabhupada looked at me again with that same look. "This better be a good story." Everybody stopped, and Prabhupada stopped. And then I told the story how he was a big philosophy teacher, but when he became sick, he changed his philosophy. So Prabhupada had been sick at the time. This was 74 in Vrindavan. So when I told it Prabhupada, then he laughed and he said, "Yes, we're not changing our philosophy because we become sick." And so we appreciated that.
I remember one morning walk in Vrindavan. We were going for a morning walk, and Prabhupada stopped and looked back. Said, "What is it? Get. He made note of devotees chanting. It was not problem. Chant properly."
At that stage, I was still a Bhaktin, and they really needed a pujari for Jagannath, Balaram, Subhadra. So Garga Muni Maharaj wrote to Srila Prabhupada and said, "We have one Australian devotee here. would you be able to give her, or would you kindly agree to give her first and second initiation? I never saw the letter, but this is what Gargamuni Maharaj had told me. So Prabhupada agreed, and then I travelled back to Vrindavan. At this stage now it's 1974. So this was Janmashtami, 1974 in Vrindavan, and Srila Prabhupada gave me first and second initiation together. And it was an amazing ceremony. And after the fire yajna, those who were receiving the Gayatri lined up to go into Srila Prabhupada's room. So at that stage, we would just go in by ourselves. So there was Srila Prabhupada and myself. And Vishalini, who was a dear god sister of mine, she had given me a couple of instructions. I said to her, what should I do when I go in and see Prabhupada? She said, well, Prabhupada really likes it if you smile. So give Prabhupada a really big smile. And she'd also very kindly lent me a very glamorous forest green sari full of sequins. And I was used to wearing, very humble cloth, life member leftovers or whatever, And so she dressed me up in this thing. And because it was forest green, she decided she'd stick leaves. I thought I'd look really good with bits of trees stuck in my head. So I presented this very interesting spectacle, I'm sure. And I went into Srila Prabhupada's room and I bowed down and sat up and fixed this really broad grin on my face, biggest smile I could muster with bits of trees hanging out. And Srila Prabhupada, in that situation, he displayed his great interest for Prabhupada's daughters, for his female disciples. And he said to me, oh, you are from Calcutta? And I went, yes, Srila Prabhupada, I'm from Calcutta Temple. And he said, do any men go upstairs into the women's quarters? Now, for anyone who doesn't know the geography or the layout of Calcutta Temple, let me explain that the women at that stage lived upstairs in the roof room, and we would have to go down the stairs and we would have to actually go through the men's bathroom to get to the temple. So it wasn't congenial, we'd all gather before Mangalati, bang on the door, Hari Bol, Mataji's coming through, and then we'd have to barge through hoping we wouldn't get contaminated by bath water because the brahmacharis and whatever still kept on bathing. So Prabhupada was aware that it wasn't congenial. And he asked that question. And I said, no, Srila Prabhupada, they only come up to get their suitcases. And Prabhupada was satisfied with that because their suitcases were stored on the roof. And then Prabhupada called me over and I sat right next to Srila Prabhupada, literally an inch from him. And he held out his lotus palms and showed me how to chant the Gayatri. And by a miracle, I was able to pronounce the Sanskrit properly. He didn't correct me. And, I promised him that I'd follow the 4 regulative principles always. And that was a wonderful experience of Prabhupada's great concern.
There was one morning the devotees were complaining to me about the diet and that they wanted more fruit and more. These were the American, European, the Westerners, and they were saying, look, because the diet in Vrindavan at the time was chapatis and khichdi in the morning, and at lunch it was chapati, dal, rice, and I think a sabji. So they were thinking, look, we're getting, we need to get some fruit and some other things. So, but you don't. I had already learned you don't change anything to start, right? I wasn't going there. I wasn't ruining a good thing. And so I went to Prabhupada and I said, Srila Prabhupada, the devotees are requesting that, they want some fruit and some other things in the diet. He says, Prabhupada said to me, we're grain eaters. He said, humans are grain eaters. If they want to eat fruit, then that's all they should eat. So don't change it. So I didn't, that was as far as that went. We're grain eaters. I was happy because I just loved, the chapatis and khichdi in Vrindavan were the best. You had fresh, hot chapatis, just a little burnt, and the khichdi was, the prasadam was delicious in Vrindavan.
And then when I went to Vrindavan, again, Srila Prabhupada was there, and Prabhupada would come out from his room and circumambulate the temple and then go in for darshan and Guru Puja. So there were no cleaners at that time. When you arrived at the temple commander said, you know, you're doing this, you're doing that. You got engaged. And so I got there and they said, okay, you're going to sweep this or do that. And then we would gather in front of Prabhupada's room and he would come out and we would go and follow Prabhupada around and then we'd go into the temple. So this one time, I finished my job and I went round to the temple and the devotees hadn't gathered. They were all presumably doing their service. The Prabhupada was very punctual, and I can't remember, but he came out before the devotees arrived. So I was there waiting for the kirtan to begin, Jai Prabhupada, and Prabhupada came out. And he looked around, it was me, you know, and he just did his, he didn't say anything at that time, he just went to do his parikram. So I thought, okay, well, you know, we normally follow Prabhupada, so I was like following behind doing my little kirtan. So we got to the front of the temple and Prabhupada turned and said, where are the devotees? And I was like, I don't know, Srila Prabhupada, they must be doing some service or something. Prabhupada said, where is Gunarnava, who was the temple president at the time? So I said, I'll go and get him. So I dashed round and the devotees were gathering outside Prabhupada's room. Prabhupada had gone, but they were all there waiting for Prabhupada to come out. So Guru Narada was, I said, Prabhupada's around the front. He said, what's he doing there? I said, well, you know, he came out early. So we all dashed round and then Guru Narada came, so Prabhupada said, so. And they looked across. At that time, there was like a water feature in front of the temple, some fountains. And then next to there was some, they were still fairly newly constructed, and there were some godowns, some places where they stored stuff against the wall, against the outside wall. And Prabhupada said, what's in these? And they were just corrugated tin, very simple. And Guru Narada said, oh, I think there's cement in there. And they were padlocked. Prabhupada said, open the door. So Guru Narada didn't have the key, dashed away, came back, and then unlocked the key, unlocked the door, opened it up. And Prabhupada looked inside, very small, not very big at all. Prabhupada looked around, and he came out and he said, this is where I will have my samadhi. And then we went on. And I was thinking, wow, you know, in 100 years' time, there's going to be a samadhi here for Prabhupada, you know. And, you know, Prabhupada went into Guru Puja, and you know, I didn't think of that again, that he'd said where it was.
When I had arrived in Vrindavan, in those days, early 70s, Prabhupada was very accessible. Brahmananda would be at the front desk writing, and you'd walk in, he'd say, okay, Shrav, just go. You know, and I'd walk in and Prabhupada was walking around. I had a newspaper where Tirtha Maharaj, Prabhupada's godbrother that he had mentioned numerous times, had passed away, had left. And it was very interesting in the newspaper article where it said that he had entered into nirvana and had a picture of a aura around his head. So I had this newspaper with me, and I think I was probably fault finding in some kind of way, that when I brought it up and started to begin describing it, Prabhupada abruptly, in such a powerful way, to stop me from going any further, said, there is never any loss or diminution for any devotional service performed. And that always stuck with me, of trying to avoid too much fault finding. And I use the word too much because it's such a tendency and nature of the mind. So it was such an instructional moment. At first I felt a little hurt that I may have offended Srila Prabhupada, but then I understood when Prabhupada was doing this with us, how much he was doing it to instruct us. Now we hear it all the time, but when he personally tells you that, it goes right to your heart. So that was a very powerful instruction to me at that time. And then I apologized to Srila Prabhupada, and he said, no, that is all right. He always would do that, no, that is all right. And then you get on the ground and just feel like an ant, a microbe, NPE full of obeisances, and Prabhupada, you look up and he's smiling. So that was a very dynamic experience.
I remember one particular evening, Prabhupada, I was sitting behind Yamuna, and he was saying to Yamuna, I want you to come, I want all of you to come and I want you to live. I thought he said here at the ranch. He called it the ranch. And Yamuna, she said, but Prabhupada, you know, where will we stay? Because there were 4 shacks, the open air kitchen, and those were all occupied. He said, you will stay in my house, like that. So then Yamuna was a little bit resisting maybe, and I think it's because, I mean, it was very ecstatic to be at Radha Damodar temple and to be where Prabhupada, near to where Prabhupada had stayed for so long. And then Prabhupada, he was laughing, he says, I am Balaram and I am dragging the Yamuna like that. He got a real kick out of teasing her like that. So sure enough, you know, within a few days, after Prabhupada left, we moved into his house, and we actually stayed in the kitchen of his complex there. And most of the devotees had left. I remember Rukmini was with Bhardraj. He was painting. The deities were in the house also. Radha Shamsundar, Gaurnitai, Krishna Balaram. And Bhardraj was painting all of them. And then Rukmini had been somewhat ill. And so he had said, now I think, you know, you should go, the 2 of you should go back to the States when he's finished painting. So Prabhupada was always, you know, taking care of the devotees, making sure they were getting the care they needed, you know, like that.
On management, regarding, for example, the restaurant and cooking and managing the guest house, some of the policies were a little, I found them to be a little strange, but then later on I could understand. For example, in Vrindavan, Prabhupada wanted 3 separate kitchens, small little kitchens with a little oven, you know, one of those mud-caked ovens, or, you know, that's what we were using, wood and coal. So he said, these 3, he said, he told me that I don't want our life members to go outside to drink their tea. Let them brew their tea here if they want, on their own. So you provide them. So we provided 3 small cubicles where they could actually make their tea and things like that, you know. So initially, you know, you would think that, you know, tea is an intoxicant and devotees are not supposed to take. And here is Prabhupada providing tea for the guests and life members. And he told, and so I asked Prabhupada, I said, okay, Prabhupada, you know, sometimes devotees are very fanatic and they are saying, how can you do that? Because I don't want to mention names because it's not necessary. So then he said, yes. When a guest comes to the house, then you try to fulfill all his wishes as long as it doesn't really involve sinful activities. So we may not drink it because it is a part of sadhana, but drinking tea is not a sinful activity. It may be in a mode of ignorance, but it's certainly not a sinful activity. So there's no harm if you provide tea for the guests, you know.
Once a professor from the university in Aligarh offered Srila Prabhupada a set of Bhagavatams which included the commentaries of all the different acharyas. So I was requested to go and pick the books up from Aligarh. So I went there in the temple car, and it's about a 3-hour journey from Vrindavan. And when I got there, that professor showed me those books, and they were in 2 piles on the floor. One pile was cantos 1 to 9 plus 11 and 12, and the other pile was 10th canto, which contained about 11 commentaries. So I was about to take the books, and the professor said, I would like to become a life member in exchange for these books. So I wasn't sure what to do, but I thought, I've come all this way and Prabhupada needs these books, so I'd better take them somehow or other. I said that I'm sure you'll be able to become a life member, but I'll have to ask Srila Prabhupada. In the meantime, I'll take the books back to him. So when I brought the books back, Prabhupada examined them and he was pleased. He said, these are suitable. Then I told him that that man wanted to become a life member, and Prabhupada said, these books are worth 1,000 rupees. Tell him to pay the balance and he can become a life member. So that time life membership was 2,222 rupees. But when that man was informed, he didn't want to pay. He wanted to take the books back, but actually Prabhupada never gave the books back. And I think that matter was only settled many, many years after Srila Prabhupada's departure. But Prabhupada used those books for translating the Srimad Bhagavatam and writing his commentaries.
Actually, my initiation was not personally with Srila Prabhupada, but for me it was a very significant point in my life, because I had been a devotee for 6 months, and that was usually, at that time, you could get initiation after 6 months. So after 6 months, I went to my authority and said, okay, I want to have initiation now. I've been a devotee for 6 months. So then my authority said, no, you have to wait for your husband. He joined 2 months after you. You have to wait another 2 months. So I said, okay. I waited another 2 months. So I waited another 2 months. I asked my husband, okay, let's get initiated now. And my husband said, I'm not ready. So I said, well, I'm not waiting any longer. And so I asked my authorities. They said, okay. I wrote a letter to Srila Prabhupada. And I quoted a verse from the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. We had maybe first and a few chapters from second canto. The canto was third chapter of second canto. And the verse was about, if you don't get the dust of the lotus feet of the pure devotee, then you're like a dead body. So I wrote to Srila Prabhupada, I quoted this verse, and I said, if I don't get initiation from you, Srila Prabhupada, then what is the use of my life? So he initiated me, and he wrote back, and he said, yes. He said, first birth is from your father and mother, but second birth is from your spiritual master. So now I am your father, and now your path is open to go back to home, back to Godhead. So then he said to me, how to go quickly on this path back to home, back to Godhead. He gave me 6 instructions in my initiation letter. And those 6 instructions were, always chant at least 16 rounds, study all our books, go on Sankirtan, and always do deity worship, and follow strictly the regulative principles. And then the last one, which is very hard and which I'm having difficulty doing, he said 24 hours be engaged in Krishna's service, and your rapid advancement will be certain. Then he wrote me a second letter very shortly after that, telling me how to do all these things, with what quality. He said you should always be enthusiastic, work sincerely, and cooperate with the other devotees. So this was Srila Prabhupada. He always took care of us personally, our spiritual life.
During the festival in Vrindavan in '76, there was a big sacrifice. Big means many devotees received initiation. I was sitting there for Brahminical initiation, or what we call second initiation. So the whole yagya was going on. It was April, and it was hot. Akshayananda Swami was doing the sacrifice. He was doing sitting in the sun, pouring the ghee, and he was sitting so close. It was so hot. It seems to me I mostly remember the heat, but one other thing struck me. The whole thing was going on, swaha, 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 and Prabhupada leans into the microphone and says, stop. You don't usually stop in the middle of a sacrifice, right? The traditional brahmanas wouldn't dream of doing such a thing. So Prabhupada indicated to the back of the area in which we were all sitting, the courtyard of Krishna Balaram temple. And Prabhupada indicated there was one young woman with a child on her lap. The child was maybe
not more than 1.5 or 2 years old. Prabhupada said, this child has his hand in his mouth. He's contaminating the whole sacrifice. Take him out, wash his hand, and teach him not to put his hand in his mouth. Continue. Swaha, swaha. Prabhupada was concerned. Now, sometimes we think that these rituals, well, they're just some rituals. You just do them somehow or other. But Prabhupada was concerned that there's ritual contamination. It's a ritual and there's ritual contamination. The sacrifice, the offering to Vishnu will be impeded. Krishna is not pleased if we don't follow the rules and regulations properly. The sacrifice has certain rules and regulations. We should follow that. And we may think, well, it's just a young child, but young child or whoever it is contaminating. Prabhupada said, train the child. Don't put your hand in your mouth.
I remember that in Vrindavan, I was sitting in front of Prabhupada's room, and Prabhupada was translating. Now Mangalarti started. He called me, he said, go and count how many devotees are in Mangalarti. See how much he's thinking of everything. Though he's translating, but he's concerned of other things also. So I went and counted the devotees. When I counted the devotees, came back, told Prabhupada, Prabhupada, these many devotees are there. So go and call temple president. So call the temple president. Prabhupada asking, how many devotees are staying here? So he told this many. So very many devotees were not there. Prabhupada was very angry. He said, even I should go to Mangalarti. I am not going because I am doing very important work. Why everyone is not going to Mangalarti? My temples are not hotels. They are the place that to perform worship and sadhana bhakti. Everyone must go to Mangalarti. I was very angry.
On one occasion, Prabhupada was asked, after he gave a lecture, I'm trying to remember the question. It went something to the effect of, what is it like to be always in touch with God? In other words, what is it like to be situated in God consciousness? So Prabhupada kind of pondered the question for a few seconds. And then he just answered, he said, without fear. And then he just smiled, like one of these gargantuan smiles. And without trying to hyperbolize the situation, I started grinning like an idiot, and I felt ecstasy. And the hairs on my arms were standing up on end, and I was feeling really emotional, and I thought, boy, I don't want to make an idiot out of myself, you know. But I looked around the room, and everybody else was in the same kind of state. This sort of wave of ecstatic feeling went through the room. And for that moment, nobody had any fear. It was, I can't prove that, what's the word, scientifically, but it was like there was a moment where everybody had symptoms of ecstasy. And then later on I read in Chaitanya Shikshamrita that when someone's on the Uttama Adhikari platform, by their association, you can experience symptoms of bhava. Just briefly, by their grace, by their association. So that it was like a moment of ecstasy for everyone where they felt no fear.
He was so relaxed and so happy being in Vrindavan, in his home, and acting like a host. So people would come, like devotees were sitting there, and then guests and visitors would come, and different Indian people would come, and whoever came in, he would greet them, and he would talk to them a little bit in Hindi and make them welcome, and he would make sure that everyone got some prasadam. And we were just sitting there, and I felt that I became free from all worries and anxieties by being in Prabhupada's presence. It's like all the worries of the mind, everything disappeared. Just sitting there in Prabhupada's darshan room in Vrindavan and just being with him, it was very, very relaxing and calming and therapeutic for my mind and my soul.
And then one time in Vrindavan, we would go every morning in the early days when it was just huts and the Vrindavan temple was being built. Just go out with Prabhupada every morning, and there was no construction anywhere except, you know, sand and some little bit of cement and steel coming up. So all the roads were just agriculture, and we would take a mat and Prabhupada would sit on the side of the road and call over Mayavadis and chastise them, speak in Hindi with them for a while, and then get into a debate with them, a heated debate. They were always respectful and they would leave, and Prabhupada, but he was showing us the fierceness of challenging the Mayavadi philosophy. And I once asked him, Srila Prabhupada, people are so stuck in darkness. How do you tell a person who's blind, you know, that there's vision, that there's light when they've never experienced it? And Prabhupada said, prasadam. He said, prasadam is the most important thing to bring people out of darkness. So that was also a very major thing I've always remembered, because I know that you had mentioned earlier about how I was first influenced. That's how I pretty much moved in the temple. That was like the last, you know, straw, nice straw. It didn't break the camel's back, but broke my, you know, attachment to anything. And to move in was the prasadam. It was Govardhan Puja. And mountains of prasadam. And basically slept on the prasadam floor that night, just keeled over. So Prabhupada's program of prasadam, I mean, you don't find this in any other yoga group. I had eaten so many, you know, Sri Chimoy, this one, that one, whoever you're going to mention, and everything was very, very spicy, but there was nothing like the cooking that we had in those early days in the temples. The prasadam was just amazing, and the devotees had so much love and devotion, and it was opulent. And that was another big thing to make us join in those days. I mean, most devotees I've spoken with. And Prabhupada reiterated it there right on the side of the road in Vrindavan, how important it was.
At one point, the girls, the unmarried girls had to leave Bombay, and it wasn't very ceremoniously done. And I was gutted, you know, because I looked after the deities, I dressed the deities, and it was such a difficult thing to have to leave those deities. And we had been told to go to England and collect for the new project, and that in the future there would be an altar where the ladies were serving the deities again. But I was a little skeptical, because I was thinking, well, we have to get out now. I don't know what the odds are that we'll be allowed back to serve the deities in the future. So I went to Vrindavan because Srila Prabhupada was there. And when I got there, after a few days, Akshayananda Maharaj was the temple president at the time, and somehow he knew that I could type. And maybe he asked me, and so I got to be his secretary for a very short time. So that meant I got a special room with a tap, which was, in those days in Vrindavan, was something. But then I realized that my room overlooked Prabhupada's quarters, his upstairs quarters where he slept. And somehow, even though I'd had to leave Mumbai, I could still see Prabhupada, unbeknownst to his servants and the men that were serving him and everything. But I could peep out and see Prabhupada at night. And my godsister Vishvadevi, who I'd been in Bombay with, at night we'd put the light off in my room, and we could peep out through the balustrade, and we could see Prabhupada. And Prabhupada wasn't very well then, so we could see him we could see how he was, you know. We could see Tamal Krishna Maharaj going out in the night to see how Prabhupada was. We could see one of his other servants, Upendra Prabhu. We could see them caring for him, but they couldn't see us. But somehow Krishna made that arrangement. And so I learned that it's an affair of the heart. And somehow Krishna makes arrangements for all of us to have that intimacy one way or another. And I suppose it might have been naughty in some people's eyes that Prabhupada was in bed and we were girls. But we weren't just girls, we were his daughters and we cared about him. How would you feel if your father was not well and he would? Of course you'd want to see how he was. So it all became, you can't legislate intimacy, I think is what I learned.
I had been encouraged, sort of against my will, really, by Hansadutta to travel. He found out I had engineering ability, and he wanted me to fix the buses, and he was going on his world-travelling Sankirtan party. So we drove overland with Sachinandan and a whole group of devotees, mostly Germans, and my idea was that we'd meet in Vrindavan, where he was taking sannyas, and that I would get Harinam initiation there. That was my master plan. We were late. Obviously, it's a challenge to drive from Europe to India. And when we got there, Srila Prabhupada had left Vrindavan. And I met Lokanath Swami for the first time there. He'd taken sannyas at the same time. And that we started planning to go to Mayapur. And again, my plan was, okay, missed Vrindavan, but we'll get the chance. I'd never seen Srila Prabhupada. I'd had association with Mukunda Maharaj, or Mukunda Brahmachari then, and he'd inspired me so enthusiastically. I just couldn't wait to see Srila Prabhupada. So we drove again the Grand Trunk Road from Vrindavan to Mayapur, and then as we got very close to Mayapur, we were in two big buses. One of them broke down, and I was the guy that fixed the bus, so I got out to fix the bus. All of the other devotees jumped in the other bus and drove off. And then I fixed the bus, and then I was in a situation where I realized that I don't know how to get to Mayapur. You know, the devotees that we picked up in Calcutta, who knew the way, I wasn't one of them. Anyway, so I just yelled out the window, please, you know, which way to Mayapur? And somehow by Lord Chaitanya's mercy, I arrived in Mayapur, jumped out. I was totally dirty, greasy, fixing the bus. I took a shower, put tilak on, and I ran, and as I entered the temple room, Prabhupada had just finished the initiation ceremony and stood up. But that first encounter of encountering the pure devotee, Mahabhagavat, was so profound that I knew at that time, I'd heard stories, I was enthusiastic, but somehow or other, I hadn't had that direct contact. So with that direct contact, I knew, okay, this is the person, this is going to guide me. So then we went on Sankirtan. We went out doing chanting, distributing books and so forth. And after about 6 months, we came back to Vrindavan. And I was still Bhakta Steve, Bhakta Bozo, and driving the bus. Lots of the devotees had fallen sick, they'd gotten all sorts of diseases. And so they concluded that, I eventually ended up driving the bus. And when we got to Vrindavan, Hansadutta approached me and said, why aren't you surrendering to Prabhupada? And I was like, what do you mean? He said, you've been in the movement like more than a year now, and you still haven't taken initiation. What's the problem? And I was like, well, we haven't really been in a situation, I tried, I've been trying, but we haven't succeeded. And he was like looking at me askance, thinking, there's something withholding. Anyway, later on that day, I got someone, devotee came to call me and said, Srila Prabhupada wants to see you. And I was initially thinking, as I don't know, some devotees did, have I made some mistake or faux pas, or is probably going to chastise me, or what's going to happen? So I walked round to Srila Prabhupada's room slightly in trepidation and walked into his room, his quarters in Vrindavan. Prabhupada was sitting behind his desk. And as I walked in, Prabhupada looked up and he said, "Your name is Ravidas." And I was stunned. I simply stood there, mouth agape like. And Hansaduta was standing next to Srila Prabhupada. I think it was just Srila Prabhupada and Hansaduta. I can't remember anybody else being in the room. And Hansaduta said, "I think you should pay obeisances, Prabhu." And I suddenly came to my senses and paid obeisances. And as I sat up, Prabhupada was looking at me. And I wasn't quite sure what had happened exactly. I'd been wanting this for such a long time, and now suddenly it had happened, well, but in a way that I wasn't sort of expecting. So Prabhupada could see this sort of puzzled look on my face. And I said to Srila Prabhupada, "Is that it?" And Prabhupada looked at me and he said to me, "What more do you want?" And I was like, thrown back. What did I want? Srila Prabhupada accepted me as his disciple, and suddenly I'm asking him, is that enough? And so he said, so I had to sort of think about, and I said, "But Prabhupada, I've seen other devotees, they have some yajna." Prabhupada said, "That is mere formality." He said, "Initiation takes place here, in the heart."
On a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada in Vrindavan in India, this was August of Janmashtami time, 1974. I think it was Janmashtami morning. Anyway, it was very hot. It's always hot in the summertime in Vrindavan. The flies were especially then, for some reason, very aggressive and just very intense and driving everyone nuts. So we were on this morning walk, and as the sun was coming up, it was getting hotter and hotter, and the flies were becoming more and more active. And finally, I got so frustrated and exasperated, I turned to Prabhupada and I said, "Srila Prabhupada, are there flies in the spiritual world?" And he said, "Yes, but they're not bothersome like these flies. And when they buzz, they're chanting Hare Krishna." So that was a good enough answer for me. I was able to tolerate the flies a little better after that. As soon as the words came out of my mouth, I felt like, oh my God, did I really just ask that question? Are there flies in the spiritual world? It was valid, and there are.
At one point, after the 1976 Mayapur festival, the GBC had decided to send me, the Rupanuga Maharaj, and myself to Australia. I think Madhavisa Maharaj had been sent to New York for some preaching. So I had to return to South India to finish some preaching engagements with Achyutananda Swami. And when I came back to Vrindavan, this was in the summer of '76, I told Prabhupada I was on my way to Australia. Prabhupada said, "What is this Australia?" So I described to Prabhupada, well, the GBC had decided to send me there. They wanted somebody to go and preach there. Prabhupada says, "I will write them a letter." So because I already had made arrangements for a visa and plane tickets and everything, my body was in India, but my mind was already in Australia. So Prabhupada said, "Well, if you want, you can still stay here if you want. That is okay." So for about a day and a half, Prabhupada literally played with me like a father will play with his son. On one hand, telling me, if you want to stay, you can stay, it's very nice. And if you want to go, you can go, it's also very nice. So after some time, I was thinking, what is this? On one hand, Prabhupada told me, you can do this or you can do that. So I came to Prabhupada later in one afternoon, I said, "Prabhupada, you've already told me that I could go there if I want, that I could stay here if I want." I said, "But that's somewhat confusing." I said, "You please tell me what you want me to do." So then Prabhupada took his finger and pointed at me, and he raised his voice and says, "Yes, that is what I want to see from you. This is the attitude I want from all disciples. You just do what I tell you to do." So I took it as some kind of mercy from Prabhupada that, he wanted me to stay in India and do some work in a Gurukul and preach.
Well, my initiation took place November 29th, 1971. And at the time, Prabhupada had taken a group of devotees to Vrindavan, India, and he had before the initiation, he had personally given us a tour of the different holy places, which was truly wonderful. He took us to Brasana. At that point, he rode on the palanquin. The devotees carried on a palanquin around Brasana. And he took us to Govardhan Hill, and he bathed with us in the Jamuna. It was an extraordinary time. So this time of our initiation, it was early in the morning on the 29th of November, quite a cold time in Vrindavan. And there was another couple who wanted to get married at the same ceremony. Yadabar and I were going to be married, and I was going to be initiated. And this other couple, the husband-to-be approached Prabhupada saying that he also wanted to marry this woman. The unfortunate part about it was that he had already been married to a devotee, and he had left that woman. And this second proposed wife was already pregnant. So it was rather a dishonorable, more than rather, it was a dishonorable circumstance. But at the same time, so from that point of view, Prabhupada couldn't say yes. But from another point of view, he couldn't say no, because the first wife was already gone. The second proposed wife was already pregnant. So how could he say no? It became an enigma. And he resolved it in the most brilliant way. I forever am impressed the way he resolved this problem. Gurudas was doing the ceremony, the actual fire sacrifice. So he instructed Gurudas to do the entire ceremony for this other couple first. From the mantras and the achman and the bananas in the fire, everything was done, the cloth was tied together. And at that point, Gurudas started a second separate fire sacrifice for my initiation and our wedding. And at that point, Prabhupada came out of his room and sat on the Vyasasana. So without saying anything, he made a very clear statement. It was, what can you say? It was a genius, just a genius solution to a very uncomfortable situation.
This was the early days where various people were starting to get very fancy suitcases, like Halliburton and Hartman and like that. And Prabhupada got out of the car, and first thing he said, "So you made arrangements?" I said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada." His little suitcase was, in probably real dollars in those days, $5 or $10, with a rope tied around it. I mean, like something you would have gotten Woolworths, which most people don't even know that, And I just said, oh my God, this is such a symptom of such a pure devotee. You see so many other things in life, but here is my guru again showing us simplicity and true minimalism and humility. So it was just another excitement to see again the purity of my guru. Another instructional lesson about the importance of reality and being a Vaishnav.
Vrindavan, 1976, I had traveled from Dharamsala, India to Vrindavan because I heard Srila Prabhupada was coming. So I arrived there, and in the morning, and there was class, but I missed it. So in the evening, Prabhupada gave class under the tree, and regular, and was warm, and I sat way in the back on the steps. I was wearing a yellow dhoti and shaved head and a beard I had left over because I had come across overland from Germany all the way to India, going through Muslim countries. So as soon as the class finished, Prabhupada looked at me, turned, said, "You did not shave. Looks just like a Muslim." And so the next morning, I went to Loy Basar to get shaved up.
Temple devotees went back to Amsterdam. Then after a few months, I decided I wanted to become advanced. So I hopped on a plane and went to Vrindavan and stayed at the temple there. Hari Sawyer was the temple commander, and Akshoyananda was the temple president. And I did service at the temple. And in the evenings, Srila Prabhupada was there at that time. He would have darshan in his room. And when the women could get in his room, we all stayed in the back against the wall, all the women, like in a row against the wall, either standing or sometimes sitting. And we were all as quiet as possible. And sometimes we'd be motioned to leave. Whenever that would happen to me, I'd make a disgruntled face, and every time Prabhupada would say, no, just leave them. He was so tolerant with the women. I always felt like he was on my side. He was looking out for us.
Once I was in Srila Prabhupada's house in Vrindavan in 1974 during the Mayapur Vrindavan festival. And that time Madhavisa Swami was in the room and he was just leaving. So he was saying goodbye to Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was thanking him for his service. Prabhupada told him that you are a perfect leader. And he said, I'm just trying to follow you, Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada replied, of course, he said, without following properly, you can never become a perfect leader.
So during the 1976 festival in Vrindavan, there was, I believe it was Ram Navami, and there was a whole schedule that was started at Mangalarti and went all the way to midnight. Prabhupada was given a lecture that evening at Krishna's birthplace in Mathura. And there was a pandal set up, and 20,000 people came. So it was really very, very impressive. So, you know, there was Mangalarti, and after Mangalarti, I got to go on a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada, we went down, I think it was the Cowherd Boys where they used to take the calves, that trail. So Prabhupada walked for a very long time, and he was preaching very vigorously. And went on and on and on and on. So then anyways, Prabhupada went back, you know, continued the walk. It was about like an hour and a half walk, very long walk. He was making a lot of very serious points. And when he got back, we had a whole program there. You know, he gave class, etc. Then they had all these dignitaries come from New Delhi. It was like the governor, I mean, you know, big, what would be equivalent to like a senator, state representatives, meeting Prabhupada all day. And I was just hanging outside his, you know, his room. And Prabhupada was just preaching like amazing all day long. And people were laughing, and you could just see the faces of all these dignitaries. I mean, Prabhupada was just, he was like a lion amongst lambs. He was just preaching so vigorously. I was amazed. Then, you know, that went on for the entire day. And then, of course, there was a festival, and then we went to, at night, we went to Mathura. And Prabhupada gave this lecture, which, as I said, about 20,000 people showed up. And then I'm looking at the devotees. There's devotees from Africa, there's devotees from Europe, there's devotees from England and Australia and South America. And I'm thinking about Bhaktivinoda Thakur, how he said, when will the Americans and Englishmen and Germans come and with their hands raised high say, Jai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, right? When will that day come? And I was like, wow, the day has come. And there's all these devotees there. And I was thinking, Prabhupada, you did it. I was thinking, you did this. So what happened is the talk went on for quite a long time, into the night. And by the time we got back to Fogal Ashram, we were staying at Fogal Ashram, it was like midnight. And everyone was completely exhausted. I mean, the day was just like, I'm done, you know. But I might as well just stay up and go chant my japa. So I came out the front of Krishna Balaram's temple and I started to circumambulate. And as I came around the back of the temple, I was right next to Srila Prabhupada's room. And there was a light on. Now, Prabhupada has been preaching, tirelessly since 4 o'clock in the morning. It's 2 o'clock the next day. And in his room, he has his dictaphone. And he's going, Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakur says in his explanation of the Gita. And Prabhupada's translating the Bhagavatam. And he was doing it for us. That was the only, logical, he should be exhausted himself. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. He got back at midnight. And he's translating the Bhagavatam. And I got to I chanted my japa, and it was just me and Prabhupada. He didn't know I don't know if he knew. He knows whatever Krishna wants him to know. And I just got to watch him translate the Bhagavatam for about 20 minutes. And then his servant came out and kicked me out. I'm like, I'm not doing anything. But the amazing thing was Srila Prabhupada's tireless pursuit of giving Krishna consciousness to this planet, to this world, to this universe. And that's why he's the spiritual master of the universe.
Krishna Kirtana Ganana Tanapano Je Anilo Premadana Koruna Prachu Anilo Premadana Karuna